So let's begin. And what I decided to do is that I would start to look at the whole process, the general process of the nervous system, because I think it's important to understand how the nervous system works and interacts on the earthly plane in such a way as that it then plays a role into how we think, how we feel, the things that we believe, the actions that we take, and the way that we're able to interact as entrepreneurs and people in the world. Okay. Now, can you see a full screen view of the human nervous system?
Yes.
Okay. So whenever we're talking about psychology or information processing in the brain, we start with the human nervous system. And the human nervous system, most people really think, oh, they concentrate the attention on the brain. And the brain is, if you will, the processing unit. It's this 3 pounds of tissue that we've got in between our ears. We call it the human computer. But it receives all kinds of input from the environment. So everything that we see externally and we experience as external information. And we also get a whole bunch of internal information about how we feel, about the state of our muscles, about the state of our body and our bodily systems, and indeed also in terms of our intuition, our general feelings are we can become conscious of how we feel related to how we experience the nervous system. In this diagram here, of course, it shows the brain at the top, and there's a sort of a little ball of tissue at the back there. And there's then this forms the brain itself, and then where the brain connects to the spinal cord at the base of the skull. So there's a small hole that just into which then the spinal cord connects to the brain. And then from there, you can see there's all kinds of nerves going through the ribs and the heart and all the organs of the abdomen and down the legs and the arms to the tips of your fingers. So the way that it works is it works very similar to the way, well, in fact, we have designed the mechanical computer based on the nervous system. The nervous system receives input. It processes that information in the brain, and it then responds in an appropriate manner by sending information back to the body and saying, okay, this is what I want you to do. And almost all of that is happening on an unconscious level. That's the first part of the way to think about the nervous system. So input through the senses. It could be our eyes and our ears, although it could be our sense of touch. It could be the state of our muscles, how we feel in our organs, in our body. And all of that comes into the brain, very interestingly, in one exclusive part of the brain. And so let's take a closer look at the brain, because the brain is so interesting, because that's the information processing. That is the piece where, Valentinas, you spoke very specifically about the interest in psychology. So we need to take a look very quickly at the brain. This is a cross-section of the brain. What you're looking at is you're looking at a cutaway view. So imagine that this is sliced down the middle of your head, and you're looking at the blue area is the front, and this ball of tissue at the back that's called the cerebellum is at the back. And then you've got all of this gray matter at the top, and then you've got this colored stuff in the middle. And then you got this is the extension down here at the bottom, where you can see the spinal cord into this bulged area, which we call the brain stem. Okay. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
You're looking at the right side, the inside of the right side of the brain. Now, what's interesting is that we can take a look and we can identify that there are certain parts of the brain that develop at certain times. And I wanted to speak very specifically about the brainstem, because the brainstem is providing all of the input from the body, and it comes in comes in through the brainstem. So if you can imagine all these wires that are coming in and bringing information about your sense of touch and your muscles and your hunger and your thirst, and how your body needs to work in from an abdominal point of view, the production of blood cells and the growth of bones and those kinds of things. Everything is coming in here. And in the core of this, even in the well, you can't really see in this area in here, but where the cursor is just above this red area, there's the area where the eyes have the input and go into, again, this part of the brain. So if I'm to use my hand to demonstrate what it looks like, so my forearm is the spinal cord, and then you have the brainstem, which kind of does this arch. So you could visualize that kind of an arch of tissue that does that in the core of the brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So the piece that is most interesting for the state of our nervous system that we're going to be talking about is understanding that all of our sensory input, everything, comes into the brainstem first. And then it gets shuttled and passed out into the other parts of the brain. So what you feel, so if you hit your finger on something, there's a signal that goes on from your finger all the way up your arm, and it goes directly to your brainstem first. And then that's where a kind of a filtering system is working. All right. And that filtering system has one objective, and that objective is to maintain the body in balance. Now, if you hit your finger with a hammer, for example, there's something very sore about that. And your body immediately says, I'm out of balance. I've hurt myself. I feel pain. I feel I may be bleeding under the skin. I may have cut myself, whatever. Something is not holding the body together. And immediately then it sends that information filtering through the brainstem up to the other parts of the brain that says, okay, now what do I do with this? Does that all make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So, but in the normal day-to-day activity, I'm sitting here and I'm writing, I pick up a pen and I'm just writing a pen. There's nothing out of balance of that, except if I've been writing for a long time and I'm holding the pen too tight, it says, okay, I need to rest. I need to relax my hand because I've been doing it for a long time, but it's not necessarily traumatic. Okay. So this is the first thing. Now, the other thing I do want to point out here, because there may be some people who will listen to this and say, okay, yeah, but David, it's not all the senses. There's one sense, the sense of smell, that comes in to the next part of the brain, which is called the limbic system. And that is true. So the limbic system, which is all of these colored parts, it acts as kind of like a shell that goes around the brainstem. This dark yellow structure here is the sensory input for smell or olfaction. And that is the only other sense that does not go through the brainstem. And so it's interesting that develops a little bit later. So when we talk about the process or the prospect of development, what happens is that the limbic system is the second in line in terms of our development of our brain. So the first one is all about maintaining survival functions, making sure our body is in balance and homeostasis. We need food, we need water, and this is the information that we communicate to our parents, for example, when we're between the ages of 0 and 1 year old. We don't have language, but we do have we use the language of sound, of eye contact, of touch. We use that to be able to communicate our needs to our parents. And of course, our parents are sensitive to that. In the second phase, between ages about 1 to 6, this is when this area known as the limbic system develops. And this is the emotions, learning, and memory. Okay. So this is when our emotional life starts to really becomes rich, and we start to experience ourself. The first experience we have of me as a self. I go from saying, David want this, David want that, me want this, to me want that, to the first identification of myself as a self, and that is through the use of the word I. I do this, I do that. And that happens somewhere at around age 3. So there's an identification that we have, a meaning that I ascribe to this instrument, that this is me. Yeah. And that's important. The important piece is now we're starting to, as we start to build language function, not just through communication through sight and sound and touch in the first phase. In the second phase, we're now starting to develop this use of language. In your case, you would be using Lithuania. In my case, I would be using English, right? And that's my home language. And so we start to learn what words mean. Now what happens is we start through the process of learning the meaning, and that's where this is the role of learning and memory in the limbic system that develops between ages 1 and 6. That's where we start to inscribe meaning in and understand it from a psychological point of view. What is this important? What is that? Is that important? Okay, this is a dog. Is a dog friendly? Is a dog aggressive? Right. So we start to learn those things. Is my mother loving and caring, or is my mother stressed and upset? What about my younger brother, my older brother? My older brother or sister might be already 3 or 4 years in advance, and they're having their own experiences, and our interactions with them is going to provide us with a certain meaning. Okay. So does that make sense?
Yes.
All of that is coming through the inputs that we are getting as young children. It's only the only way that we get it. We get it through sound, we get it through sight, our two primary senses, but we're getting it through a whole bunch of other senses that we're not going to talk about today. But sense of touch, the sense of survival and safety, and that's those are also sense. Once we move past that time and move into age of about 7 years old, we move into the development concentrates on the right side of the brain. I don't know if it's that's showing up or if I've got my camera reversed, but the right side of the brain is the area where the thinking really starts to develop. And we take the information that we've actually stored in our memory and our emotions and through our learnings in those first 7 years, and we now start to process it and create our own meaning and our own understandings for how the world works. But in large measure, in the first half of that developmental phase, up until around age 9, we don't really have a sense of who we are yet. We understand that we're in an individual, but it's not that sense of, hey, I'm me. And that
Mhm.
sense really wakes up, if you will, the sense of individuality that we develop happens probably it happens at around 9 years old. Might be a little bit more, might be a little bit less. It's not important that we get stuck on a time, because every person is developmentally different. So what happens then is this is where, from this point on, where you start to become conscious. You become more self-conscious. You become more aware of the world around you. You become more aware of the people, the differences, the things. You're able to interpret these things now using all of the information that you've received up until this time, which is about 9 years. Before that, almost everything you've learned is subconscious or unconscious. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, here's the piece, and this is where it starts to play a role, is that this programming or conditioning or the information that we have done and the interpretation with which we have developed for ourselves about the meaning of the various events in our life now form the basis for thinking as we start to grow up. So this is what we call our programming, our conditioning, our paradigm of the glasses that we wear and how we perceive and interact with the world. So if you have a difficult childhood, whether you may have been bullied by an older brother or sister or schoolmates in the early years, or you may have had parents that were stressed or worried about time, not enough money. If they were abusive in any way, a father that might have been alcoholic or you addicted to substances. All of those things are downloaded into your brain, and then you are actually then living that reality because you don't know any different. In those first years of life, you have no way of understanding or no way of knowing, being able to perceive or discern, as I like to use the word is discern, the difference between right and wrong, good and bad. You're just a complete sense organ. All you're doing is you're taking this in. And now what's happening is through your emotions in those first 6 years, you have developed your emotional intelligence or your ability to, or the way that you respond to certain situations. So if you lived in circumstances, and it could be general circumstances where you lived in a high stress environment, then that's what you're going to that is how you're going to start to live out your life. When you if you are even if you have stressful events, right? You may have a at this point of your life, you may have a particular phobia, and a phobia maybe it's a fear, and it may be a fear of an animal, for example, a cat, because a cat came up and was hissed at you when you were a young child and you got afraid. And so what happens is that your nervous system is now starting to organize itself in that those small animals with these claws that hiss they don't like me and I don't like them, so I'm afraid of them. And you start to create this this circumstance in your brain that you're actually then perceive that all cats are to be feared because I got hissed at or swatted by a cat or scratched. That created pain, right? So those kinds of things that we actually develop and then build in ourselves are based in our early childhood. Does this make sense so far?
Yes.
Do you have any questions at this point?
Uh, like spatial, right side.
Spatial.
Okay.
Space. Yeah. So yeah, that means spatial. So that word is literally the right part of the brain has to do with spatial thinking. Let me just go to the next
I got
slide, which shows the big picture thinking. So stories, shapes. There we go. Using pattern. Sorry, I just had a brain fart there, folks. Possibility, beauty, imagination, all of that is associated with the right side of the brain and the thinking that is the higher mental processing of the right hemisphere. So this photograph here is you're looking at from the top down, so you can clearly see the right and the left side. The left
Mhm.
side is what I refer to as the logical left, and it's really associated with detail. And you hear about this in is the logical left, the scientific thinking, mathematics, strategy, order, writing. That's all associated with the left-hand side. So, so these are the two higher order processing or thinking hemispheres. And so the logical area develop or the concentration of development occurs between about 12 years old and 16. I just want to be very clear to anyone who's watching this that if this is not the only time when logic develops, it's not the only time when spatial thinking develops. It develops throughout your developmental period and throughout your life and can develop throughout your life because we know that the brain never stops developing and reorganizing itself and learning all the time. However, the concentration of development, the time when the brain biologically, psychologically, physiologically, spiritually develops is at that age. That's the concentration, the time of greatest concentration is at those ages. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. From about 17, This is when the frontal lobes, or the frontal cortex, or prefrontal cortex, as it's sometimes referred to, is it really is developing what we call the executive function. So the higher order thinking, organizer, the analysis, the thinking, the judgment, the decision maker, all of that stuff is happening and is associated with this part of the brain. Now, here's the interesting piece. The interesting piece, when we say decision maker, when we say the analyzer, it is analyzing all of this stuff on the basis of everything that it's previously learned, particularly in learning and memory. So the first thing, so while we're thinking and assessing and associating, creating associations with our experience is always linking back to this thing that we call the learning and memory centers, particularly in the limbic system. This has a powerful effect because everything that we learned is sitting there and operating in what I call subconscious or unconscious parts of the brain. Let me just launch forward. Here we go. All right. So I've divided the level of consciousness, or the state of consciousness associated with this, into four phases. And there's actually more than this, but just for the sake of simplicity, is that the first year of life we're operating unconsciously, and we can correlate this to actually brainwave function. So the unconsciousness that we experience in their first year is like deep sleep. And you look at the brain waves of a child, and it's the same way of our deep sleep when we're completely unconscious. We have no idea where we are, what we're doing. Most of us, there are some people that can experience themselves in the process of sleep, but they develop those capacities in themselves. The second phase is what we call subconscious. So we're aware of it. We can bring it up to a higher level of consciousness, but largely it's working at a level below self-consciousness, which is really when we start to awaken into the higher cerebral cortex parts of the brain, the right and the left hemispheres. So this is really where we become self-conscious. We become aware of ourselves and our relationship to the world. We start to think differently. We start to experience our world differently. And then when we start to develop this conscious awareness that I refer to as part of the executive function, that is where we become aware of our consciousness. So if you stop for a moment and you start to think, are you aware? So let me ask you that. Are you aware, Valentinus?
Yeah,
Where are you aware that you're talking to me and you're on this call?
yes.
Yes, of course you are, right? So we're aware. So we are aware of that, right? Now there's levels of awareness and awareness that we have, but most of us are sort of operating this, yeah, I'm aware, I'm getting in my car, I'm driving to the store to get some bananas, or I'm going to shop, I'm going to go on holiday, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to be working on my computer. I know that this is my mouse, and so that, and I'm going to advance the screen into emergence of thinking, a consciousness, which I do not want to go at this point because it's going to go out, take us outside the scope of this conversation. The point is that we're aware of this, right? So now that you have this mental picture from the slides that I used, we are working at a certain level of awareness on our day-to-day basis. Most of it is unconscious or sort of a conscious awareness. We are aware that we have a cup of coffee or a cup of water, and is in my case, and we're using a telephone and we're communicating with people, and we're driving, or we're watering our plants or turning on lights and whatnot. We're aware of all of these things. But what we're not aware of is we're not aware of the programming that is underneath that. And for most of us, what we experience in our modern life is we're experiencing this dynamic between stress and relaxation. So you work, 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 and you're under stress, and and you're worried about getting things done here and there and that kind of thing. And then you need to finish your day's work, and then you go and watch TV. Or you can go and do meditation, or you can go and do some gym exercise, and you feel relaxed after doing that. So there's all kinds of different ways that we actually are living in this dynamic of stress. But most of us now in our modern world are living a life of high stress, without question. And part of that is our culture and the way that we work. And we're always drawn out into the world around us of, that this needs to be done and high speed this. And we've got high speed internet and we've got telephones that we're using and have to respond to this message and get this done. We've got these deadlines. And are we actually then accomplishing what we set out to accomplish? Part of the whole process is that we become so busy, and not just busy here in the physical world that we experience in our external world, we become busy here. And we are so busy here that we put ourselves under stress, and the body responds to stress. And then what happens is we are living in stress. And the physical or the physiological response to that, the nervous system moves into high stress mode. And when we move into high stress mode, then we're not actually able to operate in a relaxed state that allows the thing that we call flow. Why is this important? This is important because at the quantum level, when we start to understand how the quantum level of entrepreneurship works, we understand that flow is the state of being able to operate as an entrepreneur, as a business. The more that we are able to relax, the more we are able to to tap into the infinite energy, the infinite resources that are available to each one of us. The stress mode keeps us as individuals. It keeps us as thinking that we are an island unto ourselves, that I am the only thing and the most important thing in the universe, and that I've got to get it all done myself. So the most important thing that we can do is really start to detach. And where does that thinking come from? That thinking comes from deep in the limbic system, deep from the stressful experiences that we had, deep from the belief system that we've constructed in what we call the paradigm or the programming. And in modern speak, we call this the limiting beliefs. So, what we need to do, and what is the most important thing to do, is to be able to find the way to our way into, if you will, relaxing or to living in non resistance, as David Bayer refers to it, non resistance to what is in front of us. And when we're able to do that, we're able to move into a state of flow with the quantum field. And the quantum field is very simply this whole field of energy in which we are all bathed and of which we're a part. You can't separate yourself from it. And we're starting to understand this really from a physics point of view, is that the whole thing is energy. And there's all kinds of energy that is all around us that we're immersed in. And there's a part of us that we can't see. It's like, okay, I can't see the signals that are coming through on my telephone that are sending me messages. It's energy, right? It's energy transmitted through what we call microwaves. We can't see infrared. We can't see, but we can experience that through the form of heat. That's infrared radiation, right? We experience watching television, right? And television comes through a series of signals that are very specific bandwidth for television, for a signal to be sent, scrambled up through from the broadcaster to where it is on my TV, and then it ends up being broadcast. For the entrepreneur, when you're moving into a state of stress, you know that it's not a positive state of thinking. And when you're not in a positive state of thinking, you're in a stressed state of thinking. What's happening is you're being a energy hound. I was just say that you're taking way more energy, completely inefficient. You're not going to be performing at your best. So the best way to be able to do that is to move into a relaxed state. Now, that is easier said than done, but it does require practice for the limiting beliefs that are having you in stress. So, and there could be a whole list of limiting beliefs that you've got that are underneath that are operating on your subconscious, like I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I haven't got enough money, I haven't got a good relationship, I haven't got, I'm no good at this, I can't do that. So the whole bunch of other stories that we've got that we're actually then generating, and that's actually generating and supporting the thinking that we've actually got. So that once we're able to start to unpack what some of those limiting beliefs are and to transform them into next level belief, so removing them or undoing them or rewiring the brain, then what happens is that we're able to start to move into a powerful state of being and really be able to understand what it is that we are meant to do here on the planet and what it is that we can do. Because what you're doing is you're sensing what the next thing is you need to do rather than being in a state of panic and think you have to do this and think you have to do that in order. And you see, in fact, most entrepreneurs are in this state of mind where they are so caught up in what they need to do that they are not able to process a relaxed state of mind to find the flow and find the way that the universe is actually speaking to them so that they can sense what the next step is. It's not about not taking action. What it is, it's about taking a more calm, poised, empowered state of action as you step into your life and your business life. Does that make sense?
Yes. That's why when you feel more stressed, like you feel the press here, pressure.
It's your whole body, your entire body, right? So if you think about that, so what happens is we generate these thoughts. We have these thoughts that are playing in our mind, and that goes into the emotional center, into the limbic system, and that limbic system triggers the stress response, which is in the brainstem. And then what happens is the whole body moves into stress, adrenaline, cortisol, and then what happens is you move into these what I call thought loops or mental loops. You go round, around, round, around, round, round until you're so completely exhausted that you actually fall down, right? Or when you recognize that, you have tools to be able to transform that and stop that and to make a different decision. That's what it really comes down to. So when we talk about the awareness, the of the conscious awareness of the forebrain, yes, we're aware of what we do, but now the next level awareness is, am I aware of myself? Am I aware of my thinking? Am I aware of what's going on inside my brain and not just what's going on around me? So it becomes a really, really important step to become first aware of that. And then second of all, have tools to be able to manage those pieces that are then going to end up serving you in the whatever it is, your life. It can be in business, it can be just in life itself, because we can talk about whether it's if you're a student, we can talk about if you're in a relationship, we can talk about if you're in business or a career, we can talk about your finances, we can talk about your spiritual life. So all of these are really critical and key pieces to understanding how is it that I can move into a state of flow and in concert with what is available to me in the universe rather than just in a state of stress. Do you have any questions?
I was once like read a book about brains, how it's works. So I know it's one part of brain like blocking another. You get some information in your brain, and one the part like make uh is like sorry, but my English it's a little bit hard
Okay,
to
it's
me
all
to
right. May
make.
I interpret? May I
Yes.
interpret what you're saying? So here's an example of how that works. When you move into a state of stress and high stress, you move into what's known, the brainstem activates a thing called fight or flight or freeze. So what happens is your whole body is now preparing to your experiences is that you're under threat. You believe that you're under threat. You may not be under threat, but you believe it. So what happens is you move into this state where you release adrenaline and cortisol from the areas just that are these little woolly caps that are mounted on your kidneys on your back, and it releases it into the bloodstream, and then you're ready to either run away from the threat or fight the threat, or in some cases, you what is known as freeze. You can't do anything because you're just anchored to the spot. Now, what's happening under those circumstances in the brain is that there are certain brain areas that are shutting down
Hmm.
because you perceive, you're thinking, I'm there's the lion over there and he's going to eat me. And I need to take corrective action in order to be able to survive in this physiology. So there's a physiological um, protection. The integrity of the body is part of that fight or flight mechanism. So there are certain parts of the brain that just shut down and you do not have access to because you're wired that way. That's the way the wiring works. You have somewhere in the order of uh, you have literally trillions and trillions of connections and pathways that are going on because you've got 100 billion neurons, or more accurate, they've narrowed it down to about 86 billion neurons that are contained in here, that are communicating with one another through a variety of pathways. One neuron, particularly in the back part of the brain that I showed earlier, can make up to 10,000 different connections. So we're talking about wiring that we don't really actually understand. It's something that just works. So there are areas that just actually shut down that we don't have access to. So that's an example of, where, you get into a situation you can't think clearly and can't think straight. And when I was doing a lot of work with high pressured executives and with students, it was the phenomenon is the same. You're under pressure, you've got deadlines to meet, you've got things you have to do, and what happens is you move into this stressed out state. And what happens is you only have limited access to the ability to be able to perform at your best. So that's probably a good example of where we shut down in certain parts of our brain. So one of the things that I'd like to suggest for those who are watching this, you may want to check out the podcast, the Consciousness Report podcast, which is I've got a few podcasts that I put on there. I'll probably put this one itself on. I'll do some editing and upload that onto the Conscious podcast, which is on YouTube. I do an audio version on SoundCloud. I'll put the links in the YouTube video down below. I'll put the link to the book, Awakening Our Conscious Thinking. I would recommend getting that because it's got a summary of where we are, how we've got to where we are, the unfolding of consciousness, the awakening of consciousness in the brain, and then how do we and why people get stuck in their consciousness, in their development of consciousness. And we see that happening all over the world. I won't go into that today. Awakening Our Conscious Thinking, which outlines the brain's evolution of learning, growth, resilience, and inner peace. So that's the subtitle of it, and you can download that as an ebook, and that's available as well. Others, you can go to brainfocushealth.com as well. Have a look at my website to see what other services. Because I've got a whole bunch of other free services that help to awaken this consciousness for individuals. So So with that, I am going to sign off. It's been an hour since we started, so thanks very much for joining today's conversation. I am going to uh, and thank you to anyone who's made the choice to um, spend time and stick out the stay with me throughout this. And I'll look forward to hearing from you. You can be in touch with us at support@brainfocushealth.com, wherever you are in this world and wherever you are in your journey. I wish you well. I wish you peace. I wish you a stress less life and a more empowered life and choice to live an empowered life. So until then, Valentinas, have a great day further, and goodbye to
Thank
everyone
you so
else.
much, Dave.
Okay, have a great
Thank you.
day. Okay, bye bye for now.